Welcome to the Building Digital micro conference on digital tools from data to sustainability, measuring and reducing carbon emissions in construction projects. I'm your host and chair today. My name's Joseph Broon. I'm the Managing Director of Building Digital. And we're joined today by three really interesting speakers talking about reducing carbon emissions on site and the technology there to support it. So we're moving on to our third and final keynote of today's micro conference, which comes from George Mokhtar, who's one of our judges for the Building Innovation Awards, and he's also, in his spare time, Director of Digital Services Lead at Turner Townsend. Today, George talks to us about the relationship between sustainability, productivity, and digital, and how that affects where we see the industry heading globally. So, George, over to you.
So I'm going to try my hardest not to sell TNT, and I'm going to try and talk about industry, what we need to do, how we need to work together. And I thought I'd start off by this little. There was a quote that I presented at a conference by William Gibson a few years ago, and it was a presentation that I was delivering around artificial intelligence. I think it was like 2016, 2017, and we were guessing, what could AI do for the future? And, we absolutely had no idea. It turns out we were wrong. But this quote, and the quote is basically, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And at the time I was talking about the fact that construction has the least maturity in AI, and actually it also has the least plan to invest in it at the time. I think this is still the case. We're behind farming and other things. So when you look at the same quote and think about sustainability and our part to play in the world, the future's already here and it's just not evenly distributed. It kind of reminds us of some of the major climate challenges that we're having all over the world and some of the other geopolitical things, which will eventually distribute and work its way towards wherever you are, basically. So I think, I just wanted to highlight this as both a opportunity for greatness if we start collaborating and truthfully understand how, as an industry, we can use things like technology, systems thinking, collaboration, these tools that we've got to hand to try and, authentically reduce the amount of waste and carbon that we spend change in construction. Or looking at things like events that were in the news yesterday, where they worked out the amount of carbon offsetting that's being bought in the world is approaching in some areas of the world, double the available carbon offsetting. It could be looked at as a bit of a farce, and we've somehow managed to commercialize the whole thing. So let's try and get a bit lighter. What I wanted to talk about is actually the relationship between sustainability, productivity, and digital. TNT is a business. We are a purpose-led business. Our role in the world, we think, is to try and create a more green, inclusive, and productive built environment. And it's built into everything that we do. And I guess the challenge that we set ourselves every day, and that I'm setting the people that I work with, and that we try and think about is, how do we actually achieve these things as an equation? I don't believe that these things are siloed. I don't think they can be achieved in isolation. So the question that we're often asking ourselves is, if sustainability is the destination that we're trying to get to as an industry, surely our ability to be productive, whether it's reducing waste, time, expenditure, other things, has to be the vehicle to get there. But actually, how do you underpin and enable these two things? And my particular part to play in this is around the use of data, the use of technology, the use of insight, the use of foresight, and actually starting to understand how we can use things like systems thinking and culture change to actually move the industry forward. So I wanted to highlight a few things. The number one is, why should we demand a value-driven market rather than what we currently have? Number two, what type of mindset do we need to actually unlock this value? And number 3, do we have a culture problem, and what do we do about it? So first things first, what do we hear from clients? Over the last few years, we've done extensive analysis with clients, looking at RFPs, looking at global strategies, talking to them, finding out where they are, helping them change the businesses. And we've basically boiled these 3 things. We've boiled the situation down into 3 questions. So, recognizing that we've got a volatile and changing market. Value used to be time, cost, and quality. We've now got many other value levers which are just as or more important if we're going to change the culture. We start off with the question of have you got a clear strategy? Do you know what you're doing? What we often hear back is ambitious ideas. We've got I think Andy Mitchell mentioned earlier, we've got a net zero target for 2030, but actually we don't know what our current spend is. We're not sure how to get there and make it a reality. The second thing is, are you actually delivering on your objectives? How do you measure things to actually see that progress, to actually make sure you're heading in the right direction, and how you actually adapt to change in the market? And then the third thing that we often hear is, how are we doing against the competition? I just mentioned it in the breakout. I'm a big believer in, some of the digital twin hub philosophies, like one person's case study is another person's business case. And working together and sharing information actually helps us progress as an industry rather than compete as businesses. So just playing that back then, what do we see as an expectation from clients? I'm a client representative sometimes, and the question from us is, what do we actually demand, or what are we actually expecting now? So a lot of clients are at a crossroads. They're trying to embrace new technologies. They're trying to change culture. They've been through a pandemic. They're going through workplace transformation. There's a lot of effort and thinking going into board level room conversations that they really need help with. The tipping point has changed. It's become a necessity to employ technology, things like smart technology, IoT, incredibly important when you think about the sustainability conversation, to track, measure, reduce, and rationalize the carbon spend across portfolios. And then lastly, the businesses are trying to be competitive. And to remain competitive, I actually think it's about innovating together. So I think clients want their supply chains to come together and actually present back to them a better way of working and a better way of thinking. And to us, that includes leadership, so advocacy at every level. How do we adapt the way that we work to think differently? Not just looking at faster and cheaper, but also looking at other value drivers, as I mentioned earlier. Clients are looking for a digital by default approach. And what I mean by this is, we should actually be striving to use technology that talks to each other, data that is well structured, trusted, reliable sources. I think in the breakout room now, we were just talking about, where do you get your sustainability data from and how can you trust it? Apologies, we've managed to get a fire alarm going, but we'll carry on. Thirdly, customer experience. So the client and the whole project team needs to be connected and up to speed with information they can trust at their fingertips. And then lastly, the ability to adapt to systemic change. So clients are definitely looking to help their supply chain, and for their supply chain to help them with their system. So how do we become a value-driven market? Sorry about that, if that was deafening in your ears. I try to carry on.
That's right.
So how do we...
Good on you, George.
How do we become a value-driven market? So I mentioned sustainability and productivity earlier, but there's all sorts of things that clients are looking for. So this is a little bit of something we just want to share with you. This is mountains of research, reviews of RFPs, RFIs, and the zeitgeist, or whatever you want to call it at the moment, is these key things. So how do we deliver a project on time, on budget, in a sustainable way that gets clients the return on investment and certainty that they need in a volatile economy, that improves their experience and brand, that helps make sure that we secure health and safety for everyone, so everyone gets home safely every day, we manage stakeholders effectively and engage, and ultimately the whole thing is underpinned by security. That is a huge, complex equation, much more complex than the one that I opened with. And the answer that we've come up with, and I think that the industry is focused on, is to understand those outcomes, be able to very quickly decide at the start of a project or program, or even strategically to roll out at a portfolio level, what does a framework that underpins sustainable performance look like? Help clients understand where they are, help clients understand where they want to get to. And I think the critical thing for me is applying this programmatic thinking. So we need to stop thinking about a project or a program as a point in time, and we need to start thinking about it as a step on a journey, which is ultimately being trodden by lots and lots of different people across an organization in a constant state of flux. And that's very different to the economy, I think, that we were used to previously. So to unlock that, we look to things like systems thinking. Systems thinking is the only way for me to try and tackle the challenge of systemic change. And effectively, for those of you who haven't come across it, you probably already are a systems thinker and don't know it. But it's actually a way of making sense of highly complex situations by looking at everything and measuring everything, and not looking at siloed individual pieces of work. So when I talk about sustainability, I can't talk about sustainability without talking about data, productivity, and everything else that comes around it, because we like to tackle this as a big holistic change and improvement. So I want to talk a bit about some of the levers that we've got to pull on and what we're actually doing at the moment as an industry, as a business, as an economy, to try and tackle these things through technology. And I'll be totally unapologetic about talking about technology. It's my place in the world. I don't pretend to be a sustainability expert. I'm just quite excited by it. So the first one's integrated information management and BIM. To me, this means not just thinking about how you manage and structure information, but actually mandating it, understanding the philosophy and value behind it, and looking at something at an enterprise level. So this is something which is business as usual for many clients, but actually trying to get a supply chain at scale to all work in the same way unlocks a huge amount of productivity. It's just not easy to get there. So this is quite long in the tooth now, and we'd hope that most people will be working in this way, but they're not yet. And they're definitely not working in this way consistently across a global economy, which we really have to get ourselves in a position to do if we're going to actually tackle sustainability at scale. The second one is the ability to drive different procurement models. So there's things like emerging demand for PMC model, which effectively means more risk to the supply chain, less risk to the client, but it gives us actually the ability to digitize and connect lots of different things. So you end up with a digital ecosystem supported by services and operations and people who know how to use that ecosystem, rather than trying to set something new up every time. So it gives you the opportunity for continuous improvement. It gives you the opportunity to roll up systems and tools that improve the user experience. The third piece is data analytics and automation. To other industries, we are actually laughable in this space. However, we are starting to make moves. So, moving away from a blockbuster scenario, which is what most clients get at the minute. They ask for something, then they get sent it. Sometimes, if they're lucky, they've got a portal to go and get it. To me, that's the equivalent of walking into a shop and picking up a video. What clients are actually after now, more than ever, is moving away from hindsight, which is what they used to, and moving into insight. And these insight as a service models basically tell them what's going on now, data performance at the fingertips, so that they're cognizant of what's going on and they're aware of what to do day to day. In the future, we'll move into foresight. Other industries are there. We're not there yet, but we will get there. I believe the pandemic and other things have recently kick-started a massive movement. I think Smart moved into the realms of BAU, which is really good to see in the real estate sector. It was already there in oil and gas, nuclear, others that we were talking about in the breakout. I'd absolutely love a world where we were confident that we had secure assets that were being managed and maintained by digital twins that had the right level of processing power to actually reduce our carbon spend, understand behaviours, help us get a better workplace experience, help us get a better experience at home. All these things that these technologies can do in the future and can do now once we've fully adopted them. And then the last one, which potentially wipes out the other four, is generative AI. So generative AI has hit the construction sector in a big way. We're already starting to see it, completely transform how we look at things like procurement. So what do you do in a world where everyone has the right answer to every question? You have to start just looking at experience and price and other things that they can offer, all the way down to, some of the larger clients that we're working with are starting to use large language models similar to ChatGPT to roll out ways of working, standards, etc., so that people are just a lot more informed. I'm not going to talk about AI for the rest of the presentation. I'd love to, but that's for a different day. So, just a quick recap. We're talking about a world where things are moving at pace. If clients don't transform, adapt, understand where they are, they're effectively going to be left behind. They won't be able to compete. We need systems thinking to bring all this stuff together and tackle it as a whole. We need collaboration as an industry to tackle it as a whole. But we need a culture that comes with it. And I personally believe the culture in our industry is a challenge. We currently have a people culture, which sounds like a really good thing. And a people culture basically means if something goes really well, we've got a hero, high five, well done. And then if something goes really bad, we've got someone to blame, effectively. A people culture is definitely worse than or less greater than a process culture. A process culture basically means that when something goes right, everyone gets to celebrate the fact that we've got the best process for the job. And when something goes wrong, everyone can gather around the process and work out how to make sure it never goes wrong again. That's when you start getting continuous improvement, engagement, inclusive leadership, all these things that are going to really drive us forward. And then I just wanted to quickly touch on how this can manifest itself. So, we're talking about a move in industry transforming the way that we work, but it does have to be underpinned by technologies and systems. So, our early thoughts on this were that a platform-based approach is what's needed. We need the ability to stand up best-in-class tools from industry, all the good stuff that you'll see, from Costex to OneClick to Aconex to Autodesk, all this good stuff sits in there, Microsoft 365, blah, blah, blah. Because you can get into a situation quite quickly where you start having interoperability between some of these systems. If you've got a platform to wrap around it, you can pull data from it and see it together. I think, again, Andrew Mitchell was talking a bit about Surface and Information and Power BI. All this sort of good stuff that gives you this insight into how things are going holistically as a system so that you can start understanding performance systemically and then changing systemically. And then obviously as a business, we've decided to develop a lot of apps ourselves. But I just wanted to highlight what this kind of looks like. You can wind up very quickly in an environment at a major program or project level where you start seeing all of this data together in one place in something like the Hive, where clients can start trusting, interfacing, understanding, and accessing information themselves through a portal. And I think this is the emerging future of what our industry needs to look like. And I think this intelligence, this connectivity and interoperability is actually the foundation for cultural change and achieving equations and problem solving to come and solve things like the sustainability equation, the health and safety equation, the productivity equation, etc. So you should be able to go into these platforms and see them. You should be able, I think, as we mentioned on a previous presentation before, to know what your carbon spend is on a project, to be able to forecast it, to make changes in advance at a point in time when it's still a flexible job and it's cheap to do so. So I've waffled on for a bit. I think I'm just over 15 minutes, so I'll close with a thought that I want people to think about, and I wouldn't mind a bit of a debate on it. If we're going to solve these equations, if we're going to apply this systems thinking, I believe we need to be digital by default as an industry. And I'd love to debate with people after this what you think needs to be true, whether that's industry level, boardroom level, tier one contractors, architects, engineers, you name it. I'd love to understand what you think's missing from our industry that's helping us transform, so that we can move things forward and be a more effective, more sustainably minded market. And that's it from me. So I shall stop sharing and I'll hand it back to Joe. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Lots to think about there. Thank you for a really provocative, really interesting presentation. We are approaching the end of the session. However, we have got a few minutes if we've got a question for George. Have we got any questions for George, please?
Bit of a wide-ranging question in a way, and it might be potentially unfair, but I think it's a valid one nonetheless. I mean, all this technology we're hearing, it's not just in the construction industry that you're trying to go to that technology, that data, the chat BT, the learning models. It's my game, media, publishing, broadcasting, but all this technology is power hungry, carbon intensive, and not just carbon, but all the resources that go into making the servers and the microchips and the screens and all the rest. How are we going to square that circle of trying to achieve sustainability and greater use of technology and data to achieve it with what is like the modern equivalent of a carbon belching 19th century factory?
Yeah. It's the same challenge around electric cars, right? How do you sustainably produce something without mining lithium? And it's a bit of a challenge, which I completely understand. So there's a few levers that you can pull. So, as an example, there's a company called Green Pixie, which allows you to sort of source sustainable and renewable energy powered data centers for servers, things like that. There's efficiencies that you can get which are being provided by these sort of major organizations anyway. Then there's actually just looking at the trade-off between energy reduction and material reduction and things like that. And my honest opinion is we need to make some decisions on how we're going to operate as an industry, as a GDP, whatever you want to call it, because we do have lots of conflicts going on at the minute. So we sort of telling everybody to get back out there, spend in the economy, travel, all the rest of it, and then we're telling people not to spend on fuel. We're telling people not to fly. So it is an interesting challenge. Too much details, but I was in a think tank several years ago with McKinsey and a few other people, and we were looking at competitors for major airlines. And there was an airport. It's probably not the one that you're thinking of, but there was an airport that was going to build a new terminal, and they were talking about competition and how they could maintain a market. And there was a drop between some of the airlines. And it was interesting that to solve the challenge of how do you build a new terminal without creating additional carbon spend, the answer wasn't to build a terminal. The answer was to build a data center. Because what was really interesting is all of the airlines were looking at each other and trying to work out who was winning, because all of them were losing passenger numbers. And this will give you some insight into how long ago it was. The main competitor to the airline turned out to be Skype, because everyone was just using Skype instead of flying to and fro from capital cities. So it was an interesting process. The airports built a bang of data centers and started investing in other things. So to go back to the question, I'd say all this technology is going to cost us. But what we need to do is we need to make sure it costs less than all of the waste, materials, travel, and other things that it otherwise would have, particularly in the AI space. I think that's a big challenge. There's a lot of wasted energy on just stuff that people are doing on ChatGPT and Bard and other things day to day.
Good stuff. Excellent. Thank you, George.